Yes, he is. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. To start today, had this, I think, an interesting question. It says, my father is 80, and his only meaning in life seems to be repeating the same little jobs he set for himself. Is that healthy? Well, it probably is for your father, where people no longer have obligations or a required routine. They often set jobs like that, little tasks. And simply repeating the task can be very meaningful to a person who otherwise doesn't have specific obligations. A lot of old people seem to continue getting up very early in the morning, as if it's milking time, when they don't really have any reason to get up. But getting up and being able to follow the routine turns out to be meaningful for some of them, because it sort of reassures them that they're not disabled, they're not unhealthy, and just to be able to get up and get with the day. Now, that's aside from the fact that a lot of people enjoy the sunrise. But who cares what time they get up, unless it bothers somebody else in the household, those people who have a schedule and perhaps need some sleep. Repeating things, little tasks, it's not particularly important. It's what people feel while they're doing it, or what they're thinking about while they're doing these things. And all of us need to have something that we can do. All of us like rituals and repetition to some extent. But maybe your father needs something to do. Have you tried asking him to help you do something? That's important for some people. So why not give that a try? I've used that with some old people I've worked with, and if it's an honest request, it seems to do them a lot of good. If they figure out you're just doing that because the person is old, they tend to resent it. Well, let's go to the other end of the age thing. Says, my granddaughter is a nice child, but when I tell her to do something, then she just ignores me. It makes me kind of mad, but I don't want to spank her because her parents don't believe in that. So what do you suggest I do? Well, I have some granddaughters too. First, I would suggest asking the parents what they expect you to do, because they may just want you to tell them about it, and they'll handle all of the discipline problems. How old is the girl? How old's the girl you're really talking about? Is she 7 or 8? If she's that old, why not talk to her? Ask her what she expects. Sometimes children haven't given it a thought. It's sort of a routine that they just ignore the parents. So if while she's with you in your home and you expect certain kind of behavior, well, at that age, talk to her about it, particularly if she's old enough to be in school. If she's old enough to be in school, then she has already learned to follow some rules, and so you can put it in the same context. If she doesn't want to follow the rules, then you have the option of not inviting her to your home until she agrees to follow your rules. Now, if there's a real problem, talk to the parents about it. And maybe, though, sometimes the grandparents are the primary caretakers during the day. The parents are working, and you have the unfortunate task or a good task. You like your job of taking care of the grandchild or grandchildren. But if that's so, then talk to the parents that as long as you have responsibility, you should also have the authority. You shouldn't be expected to take care of a child over whom you have no authority. So get that clear with the parents. And if there's a family dog around, then you can use the dog as an illustration of how to handle discipline problems. Well, in that same context, here's several parents have talked to me about this. That I saw the article in the Press Republican the other day about children nagging their parents. And I can't imagine a child asking 50 to 150 times for something. Once was enough. When I was a child. What do you think? What do I think about that? It's interesting because I tend to favor that once is enough too, but these children today, they learn that someplace, and they learn it basically from their parents. It seems to me that if a child has the time to ask 50 or 150 times, as this article in the paper suggested, child doesn't have enough to do, doesn't have enough to think about. That same child would probably just turn around and say, I'm bored. Bored of what? Bored of hearing himself ask 150 times for something? It also suggests that there's too much money. If a child can keep on insisting on buying something that the parent doesn't want to buy, then there's too much money there. The parents, I don't actually mean too much money, I'm talking about the improper use of money. The parents giving in. If a child has learned that, if the child just keeps on insisting and nagging, I don't like that pattern. I don't think a parent should nag a child either. I think that should be the primary model, is a parent not nagging. And if the parent doesn't nag, then the child shouldn't nag, and I think that can be balanced. I've seen family situations where both parents and children nag each other, and that's, some of them thinking, well, it's just like talking about the weather. It doesn't mean anything. It's just the way they get along. I think it should be changed. So people have too much emphasis on commercial things. The article in the paper, and I've certainly read about this sort of thing and seen it and listened to people talk about it. It's usually on the basis of commercials. What some child needs. You just go to a grocery store, and it's not unusual to see some child saying, "Mommy, mommy, 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 mommy," you know, till they get whatever they want. Some picture on a cereal box or something is not the cereal that they're usually interested in. Some parents don't have anything to deprive children of, and other parents do. They say, well, if you misbehave, and may consider nagging as a form of misbehavior, then you don't get to do certain things. But some parents don't have a whole lot to take away from a child. Children don't have much. Usually in those families you don't see nagging going on. It's interesting, isn't it? Well, here's something that I've seen and heard, and people talk with me about it. It says, is there a modesty code anymore? And the person, he posed this question to me the other day. He says, I mean the styles of clothing worn somewhere south of the belly button. I've even heard of thong underwear for little girls. Is there no shame anymore? I don't know. You know, styles come and go. They respond to the profit motive. These designers and the people who make clothes, they make them in order to sell them. They change styles in order to keep on selling clothes. And they seem to be always testing the limits to see how far, what will the public put up with, to what extent will the glamour people, whomever they may be, Hollywood or New York, Fifth Avenue, Parisian styles, whatever, they seem to be testing to see how much they can do. I've I'm sort of old-fashioned about styles. In other words, I think certain people, men and women, can wear certain styles better than others. And some people can put on a certain style dress and look good. Somebody else put on the same style and it may not look particularly good. It depends on the body shape, the height, the configuration, both men and women. There should be preferred styles that help the person look better to himself or herself, as well as to other people. And when people feel good about how they look, they usually are comfortable, much more comfortable. Media writers, people who write these programs, seem to be pushing the limits to see what they can do. The question is there no shame or modesty? They seem to be pushing just to see how immodest and, in my opinion, unshameful they can be. It's strange. I think, is there anything left? I think there should be a dress code. Dress code for schools. And I think the faculty and students, the staff, excuse me, should have a dress code as well as the students. Then they can concentrate on what school's for, rather than looking to see what so-and-so is wearing and going home and pestering and nagging the family. I remember a few years ago these fancy shoes came out, some of the popular brands we still see, and I thought they were enormously expensive. $150 for a pair of shoes that didn't make any sense to me. Most of them made out of rubber or synthetic material like plastic. It appeared to be like rubber and canvas. There wasn't a whole lot to the shoe that was expensive. And that was the fad, though. People would push and push, and I remember numerous families in those days talking to me about it, maybe 20 years ago, when it was really a hot topic. Kids changing shoes 2-3 times a year. I'm not talking about ordinary shoes, I'm talking about expensive ones. I never did figure out how some of the people can afford that sort of thing. Here's one. It says, my wife is convinced that she's fat and is constantly talking about diets. I just like to eat and forget it. She sounds like she has another problem, something like that. She may have a problem with the body image. What's going on? How's the marriage? In other words, is talking about diets and her figure and her shape, is she preoccupied about how she looks, wanting compliments? She wanted you to pay more attention to her. This diet problem is a fad also. A lot of people on diets, excuse me, they get together, women get together and talk about what diet they're on, which one works, which one doesn't. And some men are getting into it, very much so, with all sorts of emphasis on body image and that sort of thing. But did she have this problem? Has it been around a long time? Some people have a problem with their body image, and maybe the marriage isn't helping it in the sense. Some people get married thinking that this is going to solve their problems. Was she concerned about her shape before you married? And I've heard people talk about, well, I promised to marry you, but that was when you weighed 110 pounds. I promised to love you, but that was before you got to weigh 200 pounds, something like that. I've heard people put all sorts of statements and qualifications on their marriage vows. It's not uncommon that it's related to shape. I was listening recently to a conference in which he's talking about what young people, teenagers, 20-year-old young adults are seeking in a husband or wife. Most of them weren't seeking a husband or wife, but both those who weren't and those who were seemed to put a great deal of emphasis on looks and appearance. The extent of it was quite surprising to me. They were looking for that far and away above the interest in more lasting characteristics of the person. Or some people devote their life just trying to look good. And maybe it's an absence of other things to believe in. So somebody who's preoccupied with dieting may have another problem. Sometimes it's serious, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's just asking for help, asking for a compliment. A lot of cosmetic surgery going on today, changing shapes. People getting surgery, both men and women, to make themselves look different. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, but some people never see beauty in themselves. Until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Start off a question here that apparently occurs pretty often to people. It says, my boyfriend is jealous to an extreme, and in our 4 years of living together, there's never been a reason. I've never given him a reason. He's into pornography a lot, but otherwise we get along okay. What can I do about his jealousy? Well, put the two things together, I'm wondering. For some people, pornography is the other woman in the life, and perhaps since your boyfriend has his pornography, maybe he's afraid you're going to have somebody else in your life, and that's just part of the way he thinks about it. But you mentioned boyfriend and being together 4 years, and I guess that means you're living together. People who do that seem to make up their own rules. I'm not sure what rules you have and what you expect in that type of relationship, but in a marriage, when one of the partners is hooked on pornography, it usually indicates something else. There's a problem. And before marrying this person, suggest finding out a little more about it. Here's one I've heard discussed in different places I go. It says, are children getting smarter with all the technology today? Excuse me. You hear people talking, and I was listening to some children yesterday. People brought some children here, 6, 7, 8 years old. They seem to be quite computer literate. And one of the parents was posing that question as well. Well, I don't think being computer literate necessarily equates with intelligence. I don't think children are getting more intelligent. They're certainly getting more sophisticated in computers. And by way of computers, children today can explore much more of the world than kids could do when I was growing up. But it's a different set of knowledge. It's a different set of skills. And so far as I know, nothing is said that it increases intelligence. It increases awareness in certain areas, but perhaps it also takes place of awareness and ability to relate in other areas. People get hooked on computers like some people have a habituation to a television set. And it absorbs their time and energy, and it depends on what's going on. computers can be used in a very creative way, just like television has some excellent programming, instructive programming, history channels, very good material available. Excuse me, but some people never get into that. They never watch that. They become obsessed with something else. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens in a few years about the computer age. Excuse me. Here's one. It says, my wife and I disagree at what age children should be toilet trained. When do you think that should happen? Oh, periodically I have that question come up, and I think the best answer is as soon as a child is ready. And that means before a year for some, 18 months in others, 2 years for others. But it's related to not only the age of the child, physical maturity, but it seems to be related to culture. And it's also related to commercialism. For example, when people had wash and dry diapers, there was an incentive to toilet train children. But when diaper service came in, and some people could afford that, they didn't have to wash and dry diapers anymore. That was a factor. Then plastic diapers came in. I mean, modern things today, just throwaway situations. Then so many children are being cared for by nurseries or daycare centers, and sometimes the people there increase it, the emphasis on toilet training, and advances it. Others sometimes seem to delay it. But then it also seems to be related to cultures. I recall being quite surprised to learn that the poor, the lower socioeconomic Negro of the South typically had children toilet trained before they were 10 months old. I've listened and I've had middle class and higher class, social class people talk to me about how foolish that is to expect a child to be toilet trained. And yet, take the bush mothers, those who carry children around in a sling on them in the bush country of Africa or Australia. Those children are toilet trained very early. Also, children who live in families who live in the deserts of Africa and the Arab countries, they seem to toilet train their children very early compared to what people in this country do. So I have to take a position that I don't think it's a physical development, because I don't think that people in one part of the country develop twice as fast or half as fast as people in another part of the country, in the world. I think it's a cultural factor as well. So I do think when a child can spell diaper, that it's past time for them to be toilet trained. And I see children who bring diapers to the parent, and they've gone to get the diaper and hand the diaper to the parent, and they're still not toilet trained. That seems to me to be slowing things down rather than responding to what the needs or the wants of the child might be. So, my answer is, as soon as the child is ready, I think is a good one. Here's a question. It says, my cousin has what's been called anorexia. Is there a cure for that? Anorexia. Well, there are a number of therapies that have been used, but so far as I know, there's not any specific quick cure for it. The seriousness of it, and these are people who have a faulty body image, and they think they're fat when they may actually be rather slender. The real problem there is a medical condition that they often put themselves into, because a true anorexic can die, and not uncommonly they do if they're not helped or treated, and having their nutrition and their physiology in balance. Sometimes individual therapy helps with medication, sometimes family therapy helps. There's even some research being reported that there may be even a genetic factor, but that seems to be a little premature right now to try to pinpoint exactly what the cause is. That's my judgment. I think it's serious. Anybody who does have anorexia needs to be under medical supervision, because it's dangerous for them. They're jeopardizing their health. And there's another condition, bulimia, which is, they sometimes see them together, the people who gorge themselves and then make themselves throw up. They get on eating binges, and oftentimes these conditions go together. And sometimes those things that people tend to outgrow, but they seem to be related to body image, but also related to tensions that otherwise are in the family. So don't be surprised about your cousin, what you may find. Well, here's another question. Says, are attorneys supposed to try to get people to divorce? So I went to one, and she seemed to push me in that direction. Well, no, that I guess some attorneys specialize in divorce, just like attorneys specialize in all kinds of things. Criminal law, trust, corporate law, civil law, and so on. But my understanding is attorney is supposed to be somebody who helps you do what you want to do, but help you do it in a legal way. When I first moved to New York State, there was still on the books what was called a reconciliation statute. Before an attorney was supposed to go through with divorce action, and before the court would grant a divorce, in that time divorce was granted only on the grounds of adultery, the people seeking the divorce were supposed to have been referred and gone to someone else to seek help and to reconcile the differences in the marriage. Well, that didn't take long, it seems, for that to change. Once they started talking about no-fault divorce. And I've puzzled a little bit about why some attorneys seem to push for divorce. I wonder, they get more money that way, or which way do they make more money? I have attorneys who call me from time to time seeking help for people who have marriage problems. I know that some attorneys are personally in favor of stable marriages and try to promote that. Others seem to take no position whatever, as long as it's within the law about what people do. And that seems to be a matter of practice. We now have no-fault divorce, and what I hear through most of the clientele, when they seek advice from attorneys, they get legal advice. They get statements of what the law allows, what it doesn't allow, and they get a pretty fair rendition of what the options are. I know when people sometimes come to me with some very serious marital problems, and the divorce seems to be what they're dedicated to, or maybe one of the spouses has just walked out on the other one, I sometimes refer people to an attorney for consultation to see what their legal rights and their legal remedies are in the way that they are being treated. But when I do that, I'm suggesting that the people contact the attorney, make it clear that what they want is a legal consultation, and they're not necessarily there to pursue a particular avenue, but to learn what avenues there are, what possible remedies, if any, what legal steps should be taken. Because so often in these situations, particularly the ones I get involved with that way, there are children involved. And children's rights, do they have any? Children's inheritance, children's property. Nowadays people, not uncommonly, people who have nice jobs set aside education funds for children. What's going to happen to them when there's a divorce action? What's going to happen to these funds? Is that to be liquidated? And there's some very serious problems. And sometimes people set up trust accounts, and then if they divorce, well, what happens to those trusts? For whom and who has authority? Who has control? Sometimes they get really complicated, and they need good legal advice. And I've never pretended to be knowledgeable in that particular area. And that's why I suggest to people, find a good attorney and make a consultation. Have a consultation. Until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one. Here we go. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Start off with somewhat of a troublesome situation. Says my 14-year-old put his fist through a window. Why would a kid do that? There can be one or more several reasons, and it could be attention. Some kid might do that because he wants attention, show that he can. Maybe angry. Let's assume there has to be some anger there. Sometimes just showing off, frustration, doesn't know what else to do. Sometimes it's a cry for help, trying to bring attention. Sometimes it's disgust. And I've worked with several people in the past who've done that sort of thing, but adults and children. Did the person see his image in the window before he hit it? Sometimes people strike at their own image that way. And the extent of the damage, somebody can get hurt seriously. Putting an arm through a glass. So it depends what the person's intention was. There may be very serious reasons, and sometimes it's not a serious reason. And don't rule out drugs, alcohol. Sometimes people do things like that when they lose their judgment due to something else. So, what's going on? Well, I'm not sure. But I think when somebody does that, particularly a youngster, I think it suggests some potentially serious problems, and people should have that evaluated. And there aren't any simple answers. If this has happened before, is it likely to happen again? Is there any self-destructive tendency there? Is this frustration with what's going on in the family? Does it suggest that when certain things happen in the family, then the child does something, and this time put an arm through a window? What was the pattern before? I would take it seriously. I don't like to hear about this sort of thing, because to me it suggests a pattern that's likely to be there for a good while. And in that context, someone recently asked me about giving advice on a video. saying, well, these programs happen so often. What about some of these people? Somebody asks you a question. Is it sensible to wait to give them an answer? No. Somebody asks me a question like that, I usually answer it at the time, and then what I do is I fold the question into the program some other time without any identification. But no, if somebody calls me or comes by or something like that and asks a question like that that has some ramification that needs to be taken care of, immediate threat to self or others, no, I respond immediately. And it's quite clear. But it's a logical question that someone would ask. Well, this is not somebody holding the breath for 2 weeks or something before the next program. No, not that sort of thing. Here's one. Kicks in. This one has plenty of time to operate. It says, I'm near retirement. And what plans should I have other than having enough money to retire? Well, there are quite a few things to consider before retiring. First, are you retiring from something or to something? It's popular today to think in terms of stopping regular employment at a particular place in order to do something else at a particular place, retiring to something, or to have fun in another way of living. You indicated other than having enough money. Well, having enough money is a serious question. Cost of living increases. What's the source of the money? Is it money that's going to last as long as you live, or is it money that's going to be a certain amount for a certain period of time? And then what happens at the end of that particular time? In other words, like an annuity guaranteed for a certain length of time. Our pension plan is guaranteed. Is it guaranteed for life? And what is the guarantee? Is it an employer retirement fund? And who supervises it? It's nice to get into these details. Where do you plan to retire? Plan that? Is it some place where there's activity that you enjoy doing, or is it some place that has an activity you think you might like but haven't been engaged in? So a lot of people have a dream about doing something when they retire, but when they retire, they don't really change their basic way of living. The same old personality just gets older, and they don't necessarily change activities. And so some people, having the dream is more important than trying to actually fulfill that dream. Depends on what it is, but activities in retirement. Where you live, does it have a seasonal pattern? You plan to live there year-round? What's going on? How do you plan to do it? And if you have your own home, excuse me, what do you plan to do with your home while you're away? It has to be cared for. Is there some way that can be handled? Or if you have other property, how sociable are you? Some people have trouble making new friends. They go to a new place and they feel isolated and lonely, and they'd rather be back where they were. Other people enjoy that. They enjoy the challenge of making new friends. And this varies within families, very much so. When I said that, I was thinking of a couple of my children. One of them will talk to a post. He was always very friendly. And another one, very shy, reticent. Seemed not to enjoy people, particularly in terms of new ones. Has close friends, but very slow to develop them. Are you going back to where you grew up? I've heard a number of retirees who, in effect, always wanted to go back, and they dreamed of going back where they grew up, only to go back there and find out that it's not the same. People they knew, either dead, moved away, no longer interested, and and to feel even worse going back because it seemed to be the fulfillment of a dream, and the dream just sort of blows up. And so some people go and stay a while and then go back where they've been living for a good while. Also important to consider is how's your wife feel about this? What are her dreams? And if there's the wife who's retiring, and that's certainly happening these days, do these two things go together? And I've known people who got along very well as long as there was regular work. But when the husband retired, when the difficulty for the wife started, having the man around the house all day saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing it that way? Why not do it another way? Getting involved in her domestic chores, with some families, it turns out to be a problem. More of a stress for the wife who wasn't working out of the home. But if both of them working out of the home and both of them retire, put the dreams together. One's just as important as the other. And the dream of where the partner wants to live, activities the partner wants to be involved with, very important. Don't forget to put that together. There are numerous things to think about as far as plans for retirement. Hobbies. It used to be sort of standard procedure. Somebody retired and got a gold watch. It was always interesting because when time was supposedly no longer of importance to them, getting somewhere on time, you can give them a watch to keep track of the time it wasn't important. That seemed to have been the standard because nobody really knew what to want. Or fishing pole. Well, people talk about fishing all day long. And they found out that they really liked those occasions when they fished while they were working regularly. But to do it every day, some people would enjoy it, others wouldn't, like golf. Some people enjoy the weekend golfing, but they get tired of it every day. So, there are other things to do. So try to be flexible. Here's a question. It says, which is more important, teaching your children about religion, sending them to the right school, or giving them instructions yourself? It says it's important to me because I'm a separated father. Too bad it has to be either way, because I like both. I like personal instructions, a relationship with the child, and sending the child to the proper school. And that's the way I prioritize them. But I would suggest that you live what you believe in, and that's the most important teaching tool that you'll have, is the model that you're setting for the child. It's unfortunate that people have to be separated from the children. If you really want to get involved, see that your children are instructed properly, regardless of what school they go to. And if you have a say in it, you have authority. Yes, as a separated parent, I'm not sure whether or not you have the authority to select school and be part of it, but assuming from the question that you do, select school carefully. School by name may suggest it's the right school, but sometimes schools don't live up to their name, so look into the proper school, as you put it. And what kind of parent are you as a separated parent? Some separated parents, when they're with the children, it's party time. They don't know what else to do except try to make up for the time they're not with the child, and so they're the party parent. And the custodial parent is sort of left holding the bag to make up for it after the separated parent leaves and the children are brought back, or whatever the circumstance is. But those are important times. How you have fun and the way you have fun is teaching your children. I think it's best to assume that every moment with a child is a teaching moment, which is a pretty heavy burden for any of us parents. In other words, we cannot not teach our children, our grandchildren. As long as we're around them, these children are learning from us. And sometimes they're learning things that we don't necessarily want them to learn. We'd rather they hear what we say than to see what we do. Most of us have those things about us that we'd rather the children didn't copy that. Copy the good things in my personality, not the weaknesses. But children are like sponges. They tend to blot up, absorb whatever their environment is. And, well, that's how they are. That's how they're programmed to learn. You don't have to teach a child to learn. You might help them with some methods to learn better, but the child's going to learn. That you can count on. It's a teaching moment. When you're with a child, teach. Are you and the custodial parent? Apparently, you are in agreement about what religion and school and that sort of thing should be. So reinforce it. Select a school the best you can that will reinforce the values you want the child to learn. And reinforce at home what the religious instructions have been at the school. It doesn't have a place where it stops and begins some other time. It's a way of living that seems to be important for most any religion. So, in terms of how things are going to be done, when they're going to be done, be part of it as much as you can. Well, I think I'll stop there. The next one is a rather lengthy question, and I don't believe I'd have really time to get into it. So until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Start with a question that comes up, and I've observed it lately. It says, don't you feel sorry for parents who have a mongoloid child? Well, much less than I used to. I used to feel sorry for people. Just automatically, I had a very soft place in my heart for the parents. But I've seen them in a little different perspective as joyful for the parents. I've been around hundreds of mongoloids. I used to work in a hospital in Texas. Even though it was a mental hospital, we were the medical and surgical unit for two other institutions for the retarded, and maybe as many as 5,000 any one day. And among the retarded were quite a variety of the mongoloids. And most of them were happy people. That seemed to be a characteristic of their nature. Not all, because you have exceptions just like you do in so-called normal people, but most of them, that seemed to be a pattern. They weren't troublemakers. They were basically models of behavior in institutions, unless they were taught to be different, and sometimes they were. But then, a few years ago, I heard John Cardinal O'Connor give a talk on severely retarded, severely ill and disabled children, the terminally ill children. And it was really impressive to me, because what he talked about, and he had many years as chaplain experience in hospitals and that sort of thing. What he talked about was how these disabled children, the word challenge is politically correct today, oftentimes brought the best out of the parents, the best characteristics of the parents. And he gave quite a What a presentation of examples of how this was done and what he had seen. I started looking, and I've seen the same thing. Much better since I attended that conference. People seem to enjoy these children. To start with, oftentimes the mental condition is associated with some pretty severe heart and other conditions at birth, but nowadays with surgery, people can get over it. They can help these children get over it, and even today, as some of you perhaps have heard, they can do surgery while the child is still in the uterus before birth to correct some of these heart defects. It's really quite marvelous. Well, here's another question, and it gets into a little different area. It says, what drives a man to do stupid and foolish things, or for that matter, a woman? I got caught up in that question many years ago, trying to decide what drives people to do foolish things. I was still a teenager when I started trying to figure that out. And I've looked in depth. I started looking in depth, became involved in studies of human behavior, and even including a little psychoanalysis for a short time. What drives people? And I read what everybody else was reading, and I thought there was more to it than just sex, as one of the popular writers of the time, Freud. I thought there was more to it than that. That there were other things. I remember serving while I was still a student in college, undergraduate. I did an internship as an undergraduate, and I worked with delinquents. And I remember being puzzled because we had some boys, teenagers, adolescents who were from very affluent families. That was in Wichita Falls, Texas. And Wichita Falls at one time had a reputation of having more millionaires per capita than any other city, and because of the oil industry there. But I was puzzled when I worked on this juvenile board and served on it as part of my training, why these boys would get into trouble. And sometimes it was strange kind of trouble, because they might steal things. Well, these kids usually had pocket money to buy several times over what they were stealing. They were doing things for the thrill, the skills. Even before that, I remember one time when I was in the Navy, in a training facility, and a group of teenagers, gang, well-to-do, in a nearby city, nearby this naval training place, got into gangs where they would specialize in beating up on some Navy guy or Army or Air Force. When they'd find them isolated, they'd drive up in their fancy cars and get out and beat up on them. Well, it was a puzzle. That was a short-lived type activity, because, strangely enough, well, now that I've opened the story, one time Saturday we were paid, and before Liberty, that's what the Navy called it, time off, each of us received our money, but we also, in the money, we received a roll of nickels. And it was sort of strange way to get paid, but the commander said he didn't want to hear any more about these particular gangs anymore after that weekend. That any one of us who was confronted, do our best. And that's all he had to say. Here we had a roll of nickels. You put a roll of nickels in your hand and hit somebody, it makes them rather significant impression on them. And also you can use other things with the nickel. You can make a real weapon out of it with them. And that took care of it. There were several fights that weekend that took care of it. But anyway, the point being, I was really troubled by trying to figure out why were these kids, they were from well-off families. What was going on? And it sort of fit together with me. And then later, when I was also in college, I worked as a bouncer. And I used to spend my time trying to look at the people and figure out why were they getting into the kind of trouble they got into. Stupid, foolish things sometimes. Sometimes I'd stop fights by asking questions like that. You know, like, hey, I know you can whip this guy, but why? Would you like to tell me why? Long story short, I came up with these answers. And it was a synthesis of several people's writings, and putting it together a little different way. But people do things for recognition. What drives somebody to do something foolish sometimes is to be recognized. Sometimes people need to feel they're good at something, a feeling of mastery. Sometimes people just need new experiences. They're tired of doing the same old thing, so they want to do something different. And an intimate relationship. They do things sometimes in order to have a particular relationship with a person, not necessarily sex. It can be totally devoid of sex. And sometimes it's to live out a particular belief or to test a belief, a philosophy about themselves. You put these things together, and a person needs to feel good about himself or herself. And that's what I've been operating on for many years now, is that basically these are the answers to the question about what drives people to sometimes do foolish things or stupid things. Well, here's part of what's in that equation, is that people rarely look foolish to themselves. Somebody who does something that appears to be foolish or stupid to somebody else is probably not looking foolish or stupid to himself at that time. It's as if we have a picture of ourselves on the inside, and we have to look good to ourselves, and we'll polish it and we'll defend it. We'll do all sorts of things to keep looking good to ourselves. And it's from that idea that so much emphasis today is placed on feeling good about yourself. I think it's taken to the ridiculous extreme in some schools. Kids who feel good about himself and making a difference whether or not he's learning anything in school. Or achieve something. I think achievement has to be a part of it too, because in my opinion, achievement is part of mastery, and achievement is one of the ways of getting recognition. So these things all fit together. And when people are trying to explain and understand other people's behavior, there's more to life than just feeling good about yourself. You know, whatever the feel goody, feely, squealy kind of thing, baloney. That's only one of them. There's an array of other things that are related. And which one is most important? If you've just gotten recognition for something, then that need goes away and another one takes its place. These particular drives and these needs are always changing. They're in a constant flux. And it's important, I think, to remember that. And most anything that somebody does today, I explain it and can explain it, at least to my satisfaction, on the basis of one of these needs. And I oftentimes ask people in ways to get them to really relate and talk about, why was it? What were you looking for? What was important about this sort of thing? Somebody who acts foolish. And I worked with the criminally insane in the institutions that I worked with in Texas. We usually had a section for the criminally insane, and I've had plenty of years of testing to see this sort of thing, whether or not it seemed to ring true in trying to explain people's behavior. And it does. Now, very young children don't respond to these needs. Very young children are typically responding to more physical need, hungry or fear, comfort, and we learn to read their behavior on that basis. Children, before they can talk, before they can express themselves, and as far as we know, before they can really conceptualize and think about themselves in situations, they respond more to comfort or discomfort, hunger, being comforted. Children need to be comforted. That's been documented quite well for a long time. So the question comes up, and it oftentimes comes up in people's behavior. Why? Why did somebody do something? Why didn't the person do something else? Well, the reason the person didn't do something else was not only the environment, the opportunities related, but maybe the doing something else wasn't important as that person looked at it as another reason. And I think it goes a long ways in explaining behavior. Criminal behavior, most of the criminals I've worked with, and I've had a variety. I never pretended to be a criminologist, but I worked with delinquents, juvenile delinquents. I worked with adult criminals, the criminally insane, as I mentioned, and I served one time with a civic organization that had one of its projects was to work with youthful offenders. I've seen this sort of thing over and over again. Stupid behavior, foolish behavior, in other people's eyes may not be foolish or stupid to the person doing it. Try to unravel it from that reason and that perspective, and usually it works very well. Until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country.